Hi, it's Ajama, and someone asked me about land placement and how you should place your lands, so I thought I might as well make a video about it, since I accidentally got my Smurf to rank 20, so I can't really do the blue deck, the blue guide anymore. So yeah. So when we think about land placements, the one thing we want to understand is why we have what are the lands for in the game, and the lands are there to basically play cards that have land restrictions, right? For example, we can't play the Soul Drain until we have two deserts, so we need to make two deserts before we can play that card. And also, we can only play these yellow cards on the deserts. So you want to think about where you want your cards to be when you summon them. What are some strong spots you like your cards to be? What are some useless spots that you don't really care about, so you avoid placing lands there? And also you got to consider how many lands does your deck really need? Like there's not much point playing 7 lakes if you don't have a Dream Reaver, because there's no card in the game that has that requires 7 lakes. Um, you also want to consider that playing using the power wheel to generate lands takes away your use of the power wheel to draw a card or +1 Faeria. So if you're making lands in the late game, you're missing out on extra Faeria that you can play creatures on, that you can use to play creatures, or drawing for another extra option that you can have that could potentially win you the game. So in the early game, you kind of want to set up your lands in a way that you don't have to make any more lands later on. For example, this deck only requires 3 deserts. The maximum land cost for a card is 3 deserts, which is a Manta Rider. So I'm only really looking to play three deserts this game, and then the rest of the game I'm going to be clicking on the power wheel for card draws or +1 Faeria. So when we play a game of Faeria, what are the kind of spots we want to look out for? What are the strong, advantageous spots that we can summon our creatures on, and so on and so forth? Well, to be honest, it really depends on what deck you're playing. For example, if you're playing a rush deck, you kind of want to go down the middle and set up over here with a land to summon creatures, so you can hit face next turn, or to collect next turn and contest the wells. Uh, if you're playing a control deck, you kind of want to set up over here and here to get early access to your wells for collection for later. Playing mid-range, sometimes you just want to take one side and start collecting like here, or go into double collection over here. It really depends on what kind of deck you're playing. But there are some spots you do want to look out for. For example, the black spots when you're attacking, the black spots here and here, they're really good spots to place lands on if you can. That's because if you summon a creature on these lands, it means that you can collect from this well and then attack face on the same turn. Whereas if you summon a creature here, you have the option of attacking or collecting, but you can't do both. Obviously, if an enemy summons their own creature here, you can't really attack. You have to fight it. But because you're collecting and he isn't collecting with that creature, since you're blocking it with your creature here, usually you take a favorable trade. For example, you have enough Faeria to buff your creature here and to attack to take a value trade. And eventually, because he's not collecting from this well, you will outvalue him and eventually be able to collect and attack on the same turn. So these spots are pretty good for when you're trying to attack someone, especially when you're playing mid range. You can just set up easily over here, and then have a creature here to summon a land here. On the flip side, if when the enemy is attacking, they kind of want to take these spots for themselves. So it's a good idea to take these spots if you have the opportunity to, so that they don't have that advantage over you as well. Obviously, it depends on what deck you're playing. If you're racing, sometimes you don't really want to spend lands to cover this area. Maybe you just want to just focus on finishing him if you think you can outrace him. But yeah, it really depends on the situation. That's something you learn by playing the game a little bit more. So these white spots here, like on these corners, are also really good spots. And the reason is because you sometimes when you're playing decks with jump, for example a blue deck, or you're playing creatures with charge 2, it means that they can double collect from this side while still being relevant on the rest of the board. If a creature has charge 2 and they're collecting from here, they can contest the enemy, or they can contest down here if an enemy summons a creature here. So it's just really good. Also, if you have a charge 2 creature and summon it here, they have the option of collecting from either side, from the right or the left, next turn. So these spots are really good. Also, a really good example of why these spots are good for wind soldiers. If you summon a wind soldier here, for example, and there's a defensive creature over here, you can summon it on this spot, collect from this well because it has haste, and then go over to this tile and then collect from this well because of haste again, and attack in. That means a creature that you spent 3 Faeria for, you spend only 1 Faeria you basically only spend 1 Faeria because you're collecting from a well that you wouldn't otherwise be collecting from that turn. So these brown spots as well are a little bit weaker because you're less relevant on the board. You can only really be effective on this side of the board, whereas if a creature with charge 2 could be effective on this side of the board. So it's kind of hard to get your creatures in play if they're in the double collection area. But a good thing about this area is that any creature can double collect without having movement. So for example, like a farm boy can just sit here all game collecting while you fight like this side of the board with against your opponent, and they can't do anything because they're so busy defending this side of the board that they can't address the farm boy collecting here. Or like a sturdy shell, if you make like a lake here, and then the sturdy shell can just make its way over here whilst you try and get your opponent to focus on this side of the board. So yeah, those are I'd say the most important spots to look out for a beginner. Obviously there are other kinds of spots you need to look out for when you're playing the game, but it honestly really depends on what the state of the board is like, what your opponent's playing, what you're playing, what your hand is like, and all these other factors that are kind of hard to explain in like one video. So one thing I also wanted to mention as well, a lot of lower ranked players have this habit of making a lot of neutral lands for some reason. And I guess the idea is, what they're thinking is blocking off lands for the for the enemy, or for me, for example, like what this bot is doing. You see how this bot is placing lands here and here, even though it tried to rush at the start of the game. But honestly, if there's ocean tiles on the other side of the land, it doesn't really matter if you're blocking off land for the opponent, especially when they have creatures. Sometimes it is important to block off lands. That's very specific cases, and usually they're not done right anyway. So in this example, I have I'm kind of blocked off here from playing a desert. Or what I could easily just do is just step on the land and then play a desert here if I wanted to summon something from my deck, from my hand, but I don't have anything right now. But if I had like a Manta Rider, I could play it here, and it wouldn't matter. And honestly, you can't really prevent this kind of stuff from happening. So it's better to focus on other things like drawing and +1 Faeria, rather than trying to prevent your opponent from developing lands, because it's going to happen anyway. So I thought maybe we can learn something from the previous games from the other video, and talking about land placement in this sense. This guy is playing a lot of neutrals, is pretty bad, giving up a lot of land as well, letting me like step on his land. But I wanted to focus on this point of the game where um, he has an option. This opponent has an option of placing lands. Honestly, if I was in the situation this person was in, I would just draw. Um, but he decides to play lands here, I think, which is fine. Actually, a lot of people tend to play lands here, which is actually quite bad. Um, Unless he has something to play at his face. But in that case, if he plays like lands here, it just gives me something to step onto. It means that I don't have to make lands for myself, which means that I can draw and I get more advantage. Um, Whereas if he didn't play lands here, I would have to play. In what I did in the video is play double neutral, and it means that I can't get another card. So yeah. This is another example of too many neutrals again. This guy, I play with the blue deck, and I have this Steamforged Enforcer here on the side, and I think what he's thinking is that if I set this one up, I'm gonna play a land here and summon more creatures, which is true. It's possible that I could do it. So what he decides to do is that he decides to play double neutrals here. And I wanted to talk about how it's not really that important, seeing that I already have lands here, right? So all I'm gonna do is summon creatures here, and then step up with the Steamforged Enforcer, and it again puts me into that spot where it's a pretty great spot for me, since I can collect and then hit face the next turn. So one last thing I wanted to say, if you thought you wanted a bit more guide on opening with lands and stuff like that, and how to like open with different matchups and stuff, these two videos are really good. They're way better than this video anyway. Like they're better than anything I could make. So even though they're outdated, they're still very relevant, and you should definitely take a look at them if you want to understand land placement and developing early game. But yeah, hopefully I'll get the blue guide up by next month when my account resets back to 25. And thanks for watching.